Napoleon Byrne.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it's a real privilege and an honour to follow the right honourable gentleman to help open this debate and to follow on from his arguments. Mr. Deputy Speaker, follow the money is the oldest and wisest advice given to journalists who are pursuing the corrupt, shining lights where they need to be shone, and hunting the truth. Yet this dictum which has served us so well since Watergate, is now being smothered, suffocated, and strangled in courts by allies, associates, and friends of President Putin, who is pursuing a hybrid war against the West and against us. That is the context for this debate that we are moving this afternoon. Now, many of us in this House have been warning for some years that it is time for this country to wake up to this new threat. Hybrid war is a novel kind of conflict. Once upon a time, wars were fought on land and in the air and on sea. No more. Hybrid war is a battle for minds as much as it is for land, for influence and narrative, not simply territory. And that means it extends the battlefront to space, to cyberspace, and now to law space. It is fought with tweets as well as tanks, and now it is being fought with writs as one more weapon in the armoury. And of course, the reason for this is simple. What totalitarians, what autocrats, what kleptocrats fear most is the truth. And so what they are seeking to do is to murder the truth, and we are letting them do it in English courts. I give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Friend, he's making an excellent speech, and I congratulate him on this debate. Just on this point of cyber and hacking, is he aware of cases whereby these Russian-backed interests are hacking people's private data, leaking their private data, and then suing them for libel? And does he agree with me that that is an utterly absurd and unacceptable position to be in?
My friend is absolutely right, and I will come on to that in a moment, because the truth is that the truth is under attack by oligarchs with Russian connections, because what they are seeking to do is to disguise the origin of their fortunes, their methods of business, and of course their networks of friends. But the result, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that the front line of this hybrid war now stretches from the streets of Donbass and the Crimea to the troll farms of St. Petersburg to the law courts of Britain, our courts in England, here in London. It was the Intelligence Select Committee, whose distinguished chair is here this afternoon, that made clear in its landmark report on Russia on page 22, I believe, that the interests of Russian business are now so closely entwined with the interests of the Russian state that it's impossible to unravel. But it is these honourable folks who are now using English courts as their preferred location for the business of truth silencing. In a survey of 63 journalists in 41 countries, there were more cases brought against journalists in the UK than in America and Europe combined. And as the right honourable gentleman said, the US and Europe are now moving to shut this down, and so that is why we are now becoming the capital, the global capital of the lawfare industry. So there are now so many cases that what we can reveal this afternoon, and it was evident in the right honourable gentleman's speech, we can now reveal what you might call the oligarch's playbook. Step one, target the individual, not the organisation, because it's the individual who is most vulnerable, and take aim at the slightest error. So, Aaron Banks did not go for The Guardian or The Observer, he went for Carol Cadwalader, and he took aim at a single sentence in her TED Talk. ENRC, as we've heard, has gone after Tom Burgess personally, after he flagged witnesses to their crimes were being murdered. Paul Radu, who happens to be Romanian, is being pursued in English courts by corrupt Azerbaijani politicians. So we've got to ask, why are powerful interests from far away suing journalists who are not English and who do not write in English titles, why are they being sued in English courts? Surely that has got to tell us that something in our country is going badly wrong. Step 2 is to maximise intimidation, if necessary, using covert surveillance. So as we heard, investigators and journalists are now being inundated with data subject access requests so that people up to no good can basically smoke out what the investigators are actually up to. As we heard, ENRC agents actually surveilled Tom Burgess in a meeting that was actually arranged on an encrypted messaging app. How on earth did they know about that? The Financial Times journalist Dan McCrum, who actually helped break the Wirecard story, was subject to online abuse, hacking, electronic eavesdropping, and physical surveillance. Now, the point is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, these people now know no boundaries. They are completely out of control. At one stage, I've been told, Elizabeth Benham, who was the information commissioner at the height of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, was warned by counter-terrorism officers that MI5 had evidence that she was under active intrusive surveillance ordered by Mr. Aaron Banks, and so her office had to be swept. Others, as we've heard, have told us about the hack and leak technique, where systems are hacked into, information is then leaked to serve then as a trigger for defamation proceedings. Step 3 is then to file the most ludicrously exaggerated claims. So Mr. Abramovich's attack on Catherine Belton took completely out of context what Ms. Belton had actually written. We know that Tom Burgess has been attacked because he is alleged to have said that a corporate entity actually ordered these murders. The extraordinary exaggerations and twisting of what is actually written. Step 4 is then to coordinate the claims with others to maximise intimidation and indeed legal costs. So Catherine Belton was subject to this onslaught, first from the Alpha Group, then from Abramovich, then from Mikhail Friedman, then from Shalva Chesgurinsky, then from Peter Avon, and then from Rosneft. And we are being invited to believe that somehow this was uncoordinated. They must think we are complete idiots. And then step 5, as we have heard, is to file claims in multiple jurisdictions, like Mr. Abramovich's suit against HarperCollins in Australia, again, to maximise the cost against journalists, writers, and their publishers. So the impact is to create legal bills that are so big they chill and kill the truth. Catherine Belton's case cost well over £1.5 million. It would have cost millions more if it had gone any further. Carol Cadwallader's case is costing hundreds of thousands of pounds. Major Karpov's case against Bill Browder left Mr. Browder with a bill of £600,000, which the plaintiff hasn't paid because, lo and behold, when he lost his case, he subsequently just disappeared. So the result, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is democracy's watchdogs are having their tongues cut out and our writers are having their writing fingers now broken. The result of this is that suspicion multiplies and the risk of corruption grows. So I'm so glad that the Right Honourable Gentleman put before the House details of Mr. Mohammed Amersi as a case in point. I shared with the House on Monday, Mr. Deputy Speaker, intelligence sources that have been shared with me from sources inside the Kremlin and the Russian government. That includes information about one of Mr. Amersi's business partners, a man called Leonard Bogdan, who sources tell me has, quote, a definite FSB background. I now learn that Mr. Bogdan's daughter works for the Conservative Party Central Office, and indeed, ironically enough, surprise, surprise, was briefly secretary of Comena. We then learn, as the Right Honourable Gentleman said, Mr. Amersi's associate, friend, colleague, lunching partner, Carl Winter, threatened a former Member of Parliament, Charlotte Leslie, that without an apology to Mr. Amersi, the case, quote, had all possibility of going further to a really gruesome stage, unquote. What on earth is going on in this country when people like this are able to issue threat to anyone, never mind former members of this House. And still Mr. Mercy thinks that he can go to a 4-day trial next year and take Ms. Leslie to court. We still don't know the origin of Mr. Banks' donations into leave.eu, and when the Electoral Commission warned about the poor National Crime Agency investigation, Mr. Banks then sued the Electoral Commission and forced them to take down a statement about his lies. We've heard from regulators who fear judicial review because they fear the subject access requests that might come in from representatives of organised crime groups who are seeking banking licences. This is madness. This is complete madness. Perhaps there are perfectly innocent explanations for all of this. Maybe I just have too suspicious a mind. But I would like to know the truth. I want newspapers and investigators to be able to hunt down that truth and, where necessary, to publish it. So that's why I say to the Minister, we need action, and we need it now. We are still governed by that great European Magna Carta that we wrote in the 1950s, known as the European Convention on Human Rights. It establishes a positive obligation to safeguard the freedom of a pluralist media and to create a favourable environment for participation in public debate. We are failing to uphold that duty. This is not simply an abuse of libel law. Bill Browder was attacked using cross-border insolvency legislation. We've heard about how GDPR legislation is now being misused by oligarchs. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I was the shadow bill minister on the GDPR bill. I can expressly tell the House it was not the intention of this Parliament, of the Parliament that passed that Act, for the Act to be used in this malicious way. So, the new anti-corruption strategy and the economic crime plan that the government has to refresh needs to include 5 quick provisions that would help. We need what are known as SLAPP laws so that a judge can rapidly dismiss a case if it is designated a strategic legal action against public participants. Second, we need a public figure defence, like America has, which means that if you sue a public figure, you need a much higher bar to cross, and you need to be able to prove actual malice. Third, we need a sanctions regime against vexatious litigants that could include paying 100% of costs, or even punitive costs, in order to deter the kind of misuse of our courts that we are now seeing. Fourth, we need a defamation defence fund on the lines proposed by President Byrne, and I would humbly suggest that it is funded by a windfall tax on the law firms making millions out of the misuse of our courts. Time and time again, in our research, we have heard about the behaviour of Hugh Tomlinson and Geraldine Proudler and Carter Ruck and Mishcon Dorea and Shillings and CMS and Oldswang, and I have to say to the House, it is now time for the regulatory body to pass new rules to ensure that there is good model litigation principles and ensure rules of good conduct and indeed even liability on those firms for clients that refuse to pay their bills when they lose their cases, like Major Karpov. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Yet another great speech. Is he concerned? Shouldn't these their bodies, these sort of solicitors' bodies, barristers' bodies, should be more concerned about the very, very questionable ethics and the behaviour of individual lawyers and individual law firms? They seem to be able to get away with whatever they want and offer whatever service, however questionable.
I think the honourable gentleman is absolutely right, and I think that when we welcomed the integrated review and the rhetoric of global Britain, what none of us intended was that global Britain meant that London becoming the capital of the global lawfare industry. Yet we know about the profits that are being made by some of these firms, who, as the right honourable gentleman eloquently said, are now carving out a pretty big, fat niche for themselves. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to conclude with this. Once upon a time, Mr. Churchill warned about an iron curtain descending across our continent from Stettin in the north to Trieste in the south. The challenge for our generation is very different. There is now a kleptosphere that is taking shape from Kaliningrad in the west to Kamchatka in the east. Every day, urgently, incessantly, patiently, friends of Mr. Putin are trying to push the frontiers of that kleptosphere into the Ukraine, into the Balkans, into Cyprus, into Malta, into the Baltic, and yes, into Britain. It is pushed forward by attacking the weakest brick in our defences. And we in this House must ensure that our courts never become vectors for our country's opposition. For nearly 1,000 years, our courts have been sanctuaries of justice. Now they are becoming arenas of silence, places in which the truth is killed. It was Václav Havel who said that the greatest defence against totalitarians is to live in truth. Well, that is also the greatest defence against kleptocrats. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to live in truth, and that's why I say to the Minister, it is now time for the government to act.